waveform on the monitor spiked in aggressive, jagged peaks. Representing the shrill voice of Cosmic Ray, the host of the podcast Elias edited for a living. Elias rubbed his temples, feeling the dull throb of a headache that had started 3 hours ago and settled behind his eyes like a permanent resident. He dragged the mouse cursor across the screen, slicing out a 3-minute tangent where Ray hyperventilated about reptilian overlords infiltrating the Department of Motor Vehicles. Elias sighed, the sound lost in the hum of his computer fans. He was 28 years old. He had a degree in audio engineering that was currently collecting dust in a drawer. And he spent 40 hours a week polishing the paranoid ravings of a man who lived in a basement in Idaho. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the cool blue glow of the dual monitors and the amber streetlights bleeding through the blinds. It smelled of stale coffee and the peculiar metallic scent of overheating electronics. Elias took a sip from a mug that had gone cold 2 hours ago, grimacing as the bitter liquid hit his tongue. He was a ghost in his own life. That was the thought that circled his mind whenever the silence of the apartment grew too heavy. He went to work. He came home. He played video games until his eyes burned, and he slept. His phone sat face down on the desk, silent. There were no missed calls. The last message was from his mother, sent 3 weeks ago, asking if he was coming home for the holidays. He had not replied. He did not know how to explain to her that the idea of sitting at a dinner table, pretending to be a functioning human being while his internal world felt like static, was more terrifying than the concept of being alone forever. He saved the file, renaming it Episode 412. The Greys are stealing our water, and pushed his chair back. The wheels squeaked in protest against the cheap laminate flooring. Elias walked to the kitchenette, opening the refrigerator. The light inside flickered violently, a strobe effect that made the milk carton look like it was vibrating. He stared at it, unblinking. This happened often. Whenever his mind drifted, whenever the loneliness felt less like an emotion and more like a physical weight on his chest, the world around him seemed to stutter. Light bulbs burned out. The Wi-Fi router reset itself. Yesterday, his toaster had sparked and died the moment he thought about how much he missed his ex-girlfriend, Sarah. He closed the fridge without taking anything. He was not hungry. He was just looking for something to change. He moved to the window and peered through the slats of the blinds. The city below was a sprawling grid of wet pavement and neon signs, a canyon of concrete and glass. Somewhere out there, millions of people were living lives that made sense. They had dinner plans. They had arguments about money. They had hands to hold. Elias had a level 60 mage in a fantasy role-playing game and a recurring dream that felt more real than his waking life. He turned away from the window, stripping off his shirt and collapsing onto his unmade bed. He stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster with his eyes. The exhaustion hit him all at once, a heavy gray wave. He closed his eyes. The transition was instant. There was no drifting off. No hypnagogic state. One moment he was staring at the plaster, and the next, he was floating in the void. It was not darkness. It was a canvas of impossible depth, a velvet blackness dusted with diamond dust. Stars burned with a cold, clear light, not distant pinpricks, but massive, roaring suns that made no sound. He was weightless, suspended in the center of a galaxy that did not exist on any star map he had ever seen. And she was there. He could never see her face clearly. She was a silhouette composed of luminescence, a figure drawn in starlight. She was far away, separated from him by an ocean of vacuum and silence. Yet he could feel her presence pressing against his mind like a physical touch. She was reaching out, her arm extended, fingers splayed. Elias reached back. It was the same every night. He stretched his hand into the cold void, desperate to bridge the gap. He felt a pull in his chest, a magnetic resonance that tugged at his very atoms. Then he wanted to scream, to call out to her. But he had no voice in this place. He only had the overwhelming, crushing sense of recognition. He knew her. He did not know how or why, or from where. But he knew the shape of her soul better than he knew the back of his own hand. A voice, soft as falling snow, whispered directly into his auditory cortex. Elias. He jerked awake, gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The room was silent. The streetlights outside hummed. The clock on the bedside table read 3 a.m. He sat up, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. His skin tingled, a phantom sensation of cold fire fading from his fingertips. The whisper lingered in the room, an echo that shouldn't be there. He looked around the empty apartment, half expecting to see the luminous girl standing in the corner. But there was only a pile of laundry and his gaming chair. The lamp on his nightstand surged, the bulb glowing with a blinding white intensity for a split second before shattering with a loud pop. Glass rained down onto the carpet. Elias stared at the broken bulb, his breathing ragged. "Okay," he said to the empty room. "Okay. Just a power surge." He did not believe it. The next day, the internet was on fire. Elias sat at his desk at the office, a co-working space he rented to maintain the illusion of professionalism, scrolling through his feeds. Every headline, every tweet, every video was about the meteor shower. The Perseids were supposed to be active, but astronomers were predicting a historic density, a once-in-a-lifetime display. Skywatch 2025. The banner on the news site screamed in red letters, "Countdown to the fireworks." "You seeing this, Elias?" Elias looked up. Marcus, a freelance graphic designer who occupied the desk opposite him, was leaning over his monitor, eyes wide. "They say we might see fireballs visible in daylight. It is going to be insane." Elias shrugged, taking a sip of his lukewarm coffee. "It is just rocks burning up in the atmosphere, Marcus. Basically cosmic dust bunnies hitting the windshield." Marcus rolled his eyes. "You are such a joy, man. Seriously, do you hate fun, or is it a medical condition?" "I edit conspiracy theories for a living," Elias said, tapping his screen. "If I get excited about lights in the sky, I am officially part of the problem. Cosmic Ray is already recording an emergency episode claiming these aren't meteors but angel tears signaling the end times." "Well, I am going to the roof tonight," Marcus said, turning back to his work. "Whole building is going up. Beer, music, the works. You should come. Maybe meet someone. Actual human interaction. Try it." "I have work," Elias lied. "You have a date with a dungeon raid," Marcus corrected. "Come on, just for an hour. It is history." Elias looked back at his screen. A video autoplayed, a simulation of the debris field intersecting Earth's orbit. It looked violent and chaotic. He felt that strange hum in his molars again, the vibration that had started when he woke up. "Maybe," Elias said, "if I finish this edit." He did not finish the edit. He couldn't focus. The audio waves blurred before his eyes. Every time he adjusted the equalizer, the sliders on the screen seemed to move on their own, jittering up and down. His mouse cursor drifted, fighting his hand. By 6 p.m, the air in the office felt thick, charged with static electricity. When he touched the metal handle of the door to leave, a spark snapped from his finger, loud enough to make Marcus look up. Elias walked home through the crowded streets. The city was buzzing. People were already gathering on sidewalks, setting up tripods, pointing phones at the darkening sky. There was a collective energy, a shared anticipation that usually only happened during the Super Bowl or a national tragedy. Elias felt detached from it, walking inside a bubble of silence. He stopped at a bodega to buy a pack of gum. The girl behind the counter, a college student with purple hair, was watching a live stream of an observatory on her tablet. $5, she said without looking up. Prices went up? Elias asked, trying to sound casual, trying to practice the human interaction Marcus had suggested. She looked at him then, her eyes glazed. Supply and demand. Everyone wants gum for the apocalypse. It is just a meteor shower, Elias said. That is what they said about the dinosaurs, she replied, deadpan. Elias paid and left. As he walked out, the neon sign above the door, open 24 hours, flickered and died. He didn't look back. By 10 o'clock, he was in his apartment, pacing. The noise from the street was audible even through the double-paned glass. Cheers, car horns, the distant thump of music. He felt restless, his skin too tight for his body. The dream from the night before was bleeding into his waking mind. He kept seeing the silhouette, feeling the cold vacuum. Go up, a thought whispered. It didn't feel like his own thought. It felt like an instruction. Elias grabbed his hoodie and shoved his keys in his pocket. He took the stairs to the roof, bypassing the elevator. He needed the physical exertion. The roof of his building was crowded. A party was in full swing. A portable speaker was blasting synth pop. People were drinking from red plastic cups, leaning over the parapets, laughing. The sky above was a deep, urban purple, the light pollution fighting the stars. Elias stayed near the stairwell door, hands in his pockets. He felt ridiculous. He was a cliché, the lonely guy at the party, the shadow in the corner. He watched a couple near the edge, the man wrapping his arms around the woman, pointing up. They looked happy. They looked connected. Elias looked up. At first, there was nothing but the haze. Then, a streak of white fire slashed across the darkness. A cheer went up from the crowd. "There is one!" someone shouted. "Here comes another!" The shower began in earnest. Streaks of gold and white rained down, silent and fast. It was beautiful, Elias had to admit. For a moment, the cynicism in his chest loosened. The universe was putting on a show, and for once, everyone was looking in the same direction. Then the hum returned. It started low, a resonance in the base of his skull vibrating down his spine. It wasn't a sound, it was a frequency. It felt like standing next to a massive subwoofer that was pushing air but not noise. Elias gripped the railing. The nausea hit him, sudden and sharp. He looked around. No one else seemed to notice. They were still cheering, drinking, filming with their phones. Above the city, in the center of the falling fire, one light behaved differently. It was brighter than the others, a searing blue-white. It streaked down, destined to burn up or smash into the bay. But then, impossibly, it stopped. It didn't slow down. It didn't arc. It simply ceased to move. It hung there, suspended in the sky directly above Elias's building, defying every law of physics he knew. The hum in his bones spiked to a painful crescendo. "Does anyone see that?" Elias said aloud, but his voice was swallowed by the music. He looked around frantically. People were still pointing at the other meteors. A girl next to him was recording a TikTok dance, oblivious. Elias looked back up. The stationary light was expanding. It wasn't a rock. It was a tear. The blue light washed over the rooftop, bathing the party in a spectral aquatic glow. For a heartbeat, a single terrifying second, the sky peeled back. A shape phased into visibility. It was sleek, predatory, and impossibly large. It looked like a shard of obsidian wrapped in liquid mercury. It was a ship. There was no mistaking it. It hung silent and heavy, a dark god observing the ants. Elias stopped breathing. He saw the hull plates shifting. He saw the faint distortion of heat exhaust. He saw the symbol etched onto the flank, a geometric pattern that hurt his eyes to look at. Around him, the phones died. The music cut out with a wet crunch. Screens went black. The digital chatter of the party vanished, replaced by confused murmurs. "My phone is dead," a guy shouted. "Mine too." Battery just drained to 0. What happened to the music? They didn't see the ship. They didn't see the blue light. They were looking at their devices, confused by the sudden blackout. Elias was the only one looking up. The ship hovered for another second, and Elias felt a sensation of being scanned. It was invasive, a cold light passing through his skin, mapping his organs, reading his DNA. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap that only he could hear, the ship vanished. The blue light snapped off. The music from the speaker blared back to life. Phones lit up. "Weird," someone said. "Must be the solar flares or something. Did you get that on video?" "No. It glitched out. Damn it!" Elias stood frozen, his knuckles white on the railing. He was shaking. The hum was gone, leaving a ringing silence in his ears. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors. They were laughing again, moving on, already forgetting the interruption. He had seen it. He knew he had seen it. He turned and ran for the stairs. He couldn't stay there. He couldn't be around the noise, the ignorance. He needed to be alone. He needed to process the fact that the sky had just looked back at him. He burst out of the building's lobby and onto the street. He didn't want to go back to his apartment. It felt too small, too trapped. He started walking, aimless and fast, his boots splashing in puddles left by a street cleaner. He turned down an alleyway, a shortcut he sometimes took to the 24-hour diner. The alley was narrow, flanked by high brick walls and overflowing dumpsters. It smelled of wet cardboard and ozone. Halfway down the alley, he stopped. Someone was standing at the other end. The silhouette was backlit by the street lamp on the main road. It was a woman. She was standing perfectly still, facing him. Elias slowed his pace. "Excuse me," he muttered, moving to step around her. As he got closer, the air grew cold. The hair on his arm stood up. The hum returned, softer this time, a gentle purr. He looked at her, and his breath hitched in his throat. She was wearing a trench coat that looked slightly too large, belted tightly at the waist. She wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but it was the details that stopped him. She was tall, perhaps 6'4", looming over him. Her posture was unnaturally upright, her spine a straight line that seemed rigid yet fluid. She lifted her head. Under the brim of the hat, her eyes were luminous. They were not reflecting light. They were creating it. The irises were a shifting nebula of violet and silver. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and seemed to shimmer with a faint rhythmic pulse, like starlight caught under a layer of ice. Her face was beautiful, but it was a terrifying geometry. Her cheekbones were too high, her chin too sharp. Her mouth was a small, perfect bow that looked like it had never smiled. It was the uncanny valley made flesh. She looked human, but only if you described a human to a machine that had never seen one. She stared at him with devastating focus. It wasn't the way a stranger looks at another stranger in an alley. It was the way a jeweler looks at a diamond. It was the way a predator looks at prey. Or perhaps, the way a traveler looks at home. Elias couldn't move. His boots felt nailed to the pavement. The recognition slammed into him, harder than the dream. It was her. The girl from the void. the silhouette. She took a step toward him. Her movement was silent. She didn't walk. She glided, her center of gravity shifting in a way that looked frictionless. "You," she whispered. Her voice was not the whisper from his dream. It was real, vibrating in the humid air of the alley. It had an accent he couldn't place, a cadence that put the emphasis on the wrong syllables. Elias opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile the impossibility of the moment with the reality of the damp brick wall next to him. She reached out a hand. Her fingers were long, slender, and tipped with nails that looked like obsidian glass. Suddenly, the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel came from behind Elias. He spun around. A black SUV had pulled into the mouth of the alley, blocking his exit. High beams cut through the darkness, blinding him. The doors opened, and 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in identical charcoal suits. They moved with military precision. They didn't look like police. They looked like the void in bureaucracy, the people who erased files and redacted names. "Sir," the lead agent called out. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. "Remain where you are." Elias took a step back, his heart hammering. "I am just walking home." The agents ignored him. They were looking past him, at the woman. One of them held a device in his hand, a sleek black rectangle with a scanning array on the front. It was emitting a low, frantic chirping sound. "We have a localized energy signature," the agent said to his colleagues. He looked at Elias. "Have you seen anyone pass through here? A woman? Tall, wearing a coat?" Elias looked back at the woman. She had frozen. Her luminous eyes were wide with a very human emotion. Fear. She stepped closer to him, closing the distance until he could smell her. She didn't smell like perfume. She smelled like rain on hot asphalt, like ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Her hand shot out and gripped his wrist. Her skin was fever-hot, electric. "Lie," a voice screamed in his head. Elias flinched. The voice didn't come through his ears. It exploded inside his skull, sharp and commanding. "Lie! Now!" The agent took a step forward. "Sir, I asked you a question. Have you seen a woman?" Elias looked at the agent, then at the woman. He looked at her eyes, those impossible, galaxy-swirling eyes. She was terrified, and in that terror, he saw something else. He saw a plea. She was trusting him. A creature that could travel through stars was trusting a conspiracy podcast editor who couldn't even commit to a dinner date. Elias turned back to the agent. He forced his shoulders to slump, forced a confused, irritated expression onto his face. He channeled every ounce of his daily cynicism. "A woman?" Elias said, his voice cracking slightly before he steadied it. "I wish. There is nobody back here but me and the rats. Man, I am just taking a leak. Is that a crime now?" The agent paused. The device in his hand continued to chirp, but the reading seemed to fluctuate. The woman was pressing her fingers into a pressure point on Elias's wrist, and he felt a strange cold numbness spreading up his arm. It felt like she was grounding herself through him, masking her signal with his biorhythm. The agent swept the scanner over Elias from a distance. The device buzzed angrily, then settled into a rhythmic beep. "Clear," the agent muttered, sounding disappointed. "Just a civilian." "Are we done?" Elias asked, feigning bravado. "Because the light is really hurting my eyes." The agent stared at him for a long moment, his gaze cold and calculating. Then he nodded. "Move along, citizen. Go straight home." The agents turned and got back into the SUV. The vehicle reversed out of the alley with quiet efficiency and disappeared into the city traffic. Elias stood there, shaking. He listened until the sound of the engine faded completely. He turned to the woman. She released his wrist. She let out a breath that sounded like a steam valve releasing pressure. Her posture slumped, losing that rigid alien grace for a second, becoming merely exhausted. "They are gone," Elias said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you? What is going on?" The woman reached up and took off her hat. Her hair tumbled down. It was white, stark and shocking, glowing faintly in the gloom. She touched a spot on her neck, and the air around her shimmered. The glamour faded. The trench coat seemed to melt away, revealing a suit of armor that looked like woven glass and dark metal. Her skin glowed brighter now, the patterns of light on her face shifting like auroras. She was terrifying. She was magnificent. She was undeniably not from Earth. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She was so tall she had to look down at him, but her expression was one of profound relief mixed with an intense, burning curiosity. Her pupils, shaped like horizontal hourglasses, dilated until her eyes were almost entirely black. She reached out and cupped his face with both hands. Her palms were hot, vibrating. Elias didn't pull away. He couldn't. The moment her skin touched his face, the dream crashed into reality. The static in his head cleared. The loneliness that had defined his entire adult life evaporated, replaced by a sensation of wholeness that was so intense it hurt. She looked into his eyes, searching, verifying. Alien princess saw me, Elias thought, his mind reeling in a loop of disbelief and hysteria. This is actually happening. She leaned in, her forehead almost touching his. She smelled of stardust and danger. "I have been looking for you for years," she said. Her voice broke on the last word, thick with emotion. "Human." Elias let out a short, hysterical laugh. "You have got to be kidding me." "I do not kid," she said gravely. "I searched the spiral arm. I searched the databanks of dead worlds. I listened to the void until I heard your echo." She stroked his cheekbone with her thumb. "You are real. You are solid." "I am just Elias," he stammered. "I edit audio files. I live in apartment 4B. I think you have the wrong guy." "No," she said. "The key does not mistake the lock." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Not police sirens, these were lower, more urgent, civil defense sirens. The agents had called it in. They were coming back, and they would bring more than a scanner this time. The woman pulled back slightly, her eyes darting to the mouth of the alley. "We must go. They will return with hunters. Can you run?" "Elias of apartment 4B. Elias looked at the siren's lights flashing against the clouds. He looked at the alley that led back to his street, back to his empty apartment, his flickering fridge, his meaningless job, and his crushing solitude. Then he looked at her. He looked at the impossible geometry of her face, the woman who had haunted his dreams and now stood before him, offering him a hand that spanned galaxies. Fear clawed at his throat. This was insanity. This was death. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't numb. He was terrified. Yes. But he was awake. "Yeah," Elias breathed, surprised by his own answer. "Yeah, I can run." She smiled then, a small, fierce thing that showed too many teeth. She grabbed his hand. "Then run with me, human." She pulled him into the darkness of the alley, deeper into the shadows, away from the lights of the city and into the unknown. Elias followed, his heart pounding a rhythm that finally meant something. The climb to the old Griffith Park Observatory was a lung-burning sprint through dry brush and crumbling asphalt, the city lights below spreading out like a circuit board shorting out in the dark. Elias stumbled, his sneakers sliding on loose gravel, but the woman's grip on his hand was ironclad. She did not run so much as flow uphill, pulling him along in her wake like debris caught in a slipstream. They crested the hill, the white domes of the observatory looming against the star-streaked sky like the skulls of buried giants. It had been closed for renovations for 2 years, fenced off and silent. But the woman moved toward the chain-link barrier without slowing. She raised her free hand, fingers splayed in a complex rhythmic gesture. The air in front of the fence rippled. The metal links groaned, glowing a dull cherry red before dissolving into a cloud of fine silver dust that hung suspended in the night air. "Inside," she commanded, her voice tight with strain. They scrambled through the gap. Behind them, the wail of sirens was growing louder, weaving through the canyon roads. Elias could hear the thrum of helicopter rotors beating the air somewhere to the south, a heavy, rhythmic chopping sound that vibrated in his chest. She led him to the main terrace, ignoring the locked doors of the building, and stopped in the center of the concrete viewing platform. She spun around, her eyes scanning the horizon. She tapped the device at her throat, then slammed her palm against the ground. A low, resonant thrum shook the concrete beneath Elias's feet. From the perimeter of the observatory grounds, 6 pillars of light shot upward, invisible to the naked eye until they connected at an apex 1,000 feet above their heads. A dome of energy snapped into existence. It shimmered like heat waves rising from pavement in August, bending the light of the stars and the city below into a smear of impressionist colors. The sound of the sirens vanished instantly. The wind died. They were sealed inside a bubble of silence. Elias collapsed onto a concrete bench, gasping for air, his chest heaving. He stared at the shimmering barrier. "What?" he wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at the sky. "Is that?" "Photonic refraction shield," she said, her breathing barely elevated. She walked the perimeter of the terrace, checking a holographic display that hovered above her wrist. "It bends light and radar around us. To the drones and satellites, this hill is just empty parkland. We have 10 minutes before they switch to thermal ground sweeps." Elias wiped sweat from his eyes. 10 minutes. Great. Just enough time for a panic attack. He looked at her. In the stark light of the shield's interior, she looked even less human than she had in the alley. The trench coat hung open, revealing the armor beneath, a mesh of dark, iridescent metal that moved like liquid mercury. "Who are you?" And I mean the real answer, not the "I am a traveler" cryptic nonsense. She stopped pacing and turned to face him. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, a posture of regal discipline that seemed at odds with the dusty, abandoned setting. "I am Princess Eliana of the House of Vilos," she said. The name rolled off her tongue with a multitude of vowels that didn't quite exist in English. "I am the 3rd daughter of the Imperial Sun, exiled crown princess of the Cygni sector, and the rightful custodian of the Accord." Elias stared at her. He blinked once, twice. "Right," he said, his voice dripping with the defense mechanism he had honed over a lifetime of awkward social interactions. Sarcasm. "Of course, a princess. I should have guessed from the glowing eyes and the fact that you just dissolved a fence. Did you park your invisible horse around the back?" Eliana tilted her head, her expression one of genuine confusion. "We do not use equines for interstellar travel. They lack the lung capacity for vacuum." "That was a joke," Elias said, running a hand through his hair. "I am making jokes because my brain is currently trying to reject reality to protect itself from trauma." "So, Princess Eliana, what does an exiled alien royalty want with an audio engineer who eats instant ramen 5 nights a week?" She stepped closer, the heels of her metallic boots clicking softly on the concrete. I do not want you for your culinary habits. Elias, I want you because you are the key. The key, Elias repeated flatly. Like to a safe deposit box, a city. To the Accord engine, she said. She waved her hand, and a three-dimensional projection bloomed in the air between them. It showed a massive, complex machine, a sphere of rotating rings and burning energy cores. This is an ancient device, constructed thousands of your years ago to enforce the peace treaties between the 7 major stellar empires. It generates a quantum dampening field that prevents weaponized warp technology within inhabited sectors. It keeps us from destroying one another. The projection zoomed in, showing a central locking mechanism. It wasn't a keyhole. It was a complex, shifting pattern of biological data. The engine is failing, Ileana continued, her voice softening. My political rivals, the war faction, sabotaged it. They wish to let the field collapse so they can begin a campaign of conquest. To stabilize it, to lock the treaties back into place. The engine requires a biometric signature that matches the original creators, a specific resonance of neural pathways and genetic coding. She pointed at him. You. Elias looked at the hologram, then at his own hands. They were trembling. Me. You think I am... What? An ancient alien builder? I was born in Ohio. I have a birth certificate. I have asthma. Your genetic ancestry is human, she admitted. But your neural architecture, it is a statistical anomaly. A 1 in a trillion mutation that perfectly mimics the harmonic frequency of the Accord creators. I have spent 3 standard years scanning the biosignatures of 1 billion sentient beings across this spiral arm. I found nothing, until I flew past this backwater mud ball and heard your mind singing in the dark. Elias let out a short, incredulous laugh. So let me get this straight. You have been stalking me. I have been monitoring you, she corrected, her tone devoid of irony. You have been watching me, Elias said, standing up and pacing the small space. For years, while I was sleeping, while I was in the shower? Eliana blinked. Biological hygiene rituals are of no strategic interest to me. I was monitoring your REM cycles and emotional beta waves. That is literally the definition of a stalker, Elias said, throwing his hands up. A royal alien stalker girlfriend. This is great. This is exactly the kind of thing Cosmic Ray talks about. Except he thinks you guys want our water. You just want my brainwaves. I do not understand the term girlfriend, Eliana said, her brow furrowing. Is this a military rank? No, it is. Elias stopped, looking at her. She was deadly serious. There was no guile in her face, only a terrifying, focused intensity. The humor drained out of him, leaving him cold. Wait, the dreams. He stopped pacing. The memory hit him like a physical weight. The void, the star-filled silence, the girl reaching out. The dreams, he whispered. That was you. Eliana nodded slowly. She reached up to her neck again. I maintained a distance to protect you. I used a psychic dampener to observe without contact. But the resonance between us was stronger than I anticipated. She pressed a sequence of lights on her collar. The air around her shimmered and snapped. The final layer of her disguise fell away. Elias gasped. If she had looked uncanny before, she was now a vision of terrifying beauty. The trench coat vanished. Her skin was not just pale, it was translucent, revealing a network of veins that pulsed with bioluminescent blue light, tracing the path of her circulatory system like a living map of a city. Along her collarbones and up the sides of her neck, faint, iridescent scales shimmered, shifting color from violet to deep indigo as she breathed. But it was her eyes that held him, Without the glamour, they were not just luminous, they were windows. He could see depth in them, layers of spinning light that resembled spiraling galaxies. She was not human. She was a creature of deep space, evolved to survive in the radiation of dying stars. "Do you see me, Elias?" she asked softly. The sight was unnerving. Every instinct in his primate brain screamed predator, outsider, threat, and yet, beneath the fear, there was a pull so strong it made his knees weak. It was intoxicating. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff and wanting to jump, just to see if you could fly. "I see you," he breathed. "The visits," she said, taking a hesitant step toward him. "They were not dreams. They were quantum entanglements. Because your mind fits the lock, it also fits mine. When you slept, your consciousness drifted. I did not mean to pull you in, but you came to me, across light years." Elias stared at her, his mind racing back through the last few years. The loneliness, the feeling of being disconnected from everyone around him. The way he would wake up with tears on his face, missing a person he had never met. "I thought I was going crazy," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought I was making you up because I was so lonely." "You were never alone," Eliana said. "I was there, in the dark." She stopped a foot away from him. The heat coming off her body was palpable now, a radiant warmth that smelled of ozone and crushed petals. "Do you remember?" she asked, and as she spoke the words, a spark jumped between them, not physical electricity, but something deeper, the mind link. It wasn't a voice, it was a flood. Elias gasped as the world dissolved. He wasn't on the observatory terrace anymore. He was everywhere at once. He saw a golden palace floating in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, the sky a churning sea of orange clouds. He felt the crushing weight of a crown that was too heavy for a child's head. He felt the cold, sharp grief of watching a coffin launch into a sun. He felt the isolation of a throne room filled with courtiers who smiled with knives behind their eyes. Her life. And then the flow reversed. He felt her seeing him. He saw his own gray apartment through her eyes. He felt the crushing dullness of his job, the hollow ache in his chest when he ate dinner alone standing over the sink. He felt the shame of his wasted potential, the fear that he was fundamentally broken. He tried to pull back, terrified of being seen this clearly. He had spent his whole life building walls, using sarcasm and apathy as armor. Now, she was bypassing the walls entirely. "Do not hide," her thought whispered in his mind, clear as a bell. "I have seen the shadows before. They do not frighten me." The link snapped back to the present, but the channel remained open, a hum of background static connecting their nervous systems. Elias staggered, gripping the edge of the concrete bench. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't just see an alien princess. He saw the person who had been sitting in the dark with him for 3 years. "You felt it too," he said. "The loneliness." Eliana's composure cracked. Her lower lip trembled, a devastatingly human gesture on her alien face. Tears, silver and viscous, pooled in the corners of her galaxy eyes. "Every cycle," she confessed. "I searched for the key to save my people, but in the quiet hours, I just searched for you because when our minds touched, it was the only time I was not afraid." She reached out, her hands shaking. She cupped his face. Her palms were hot, her skin smooth as polished glass but yielding like flesh. Elias stopped breathing. The sensation of her touch was electric. It sent a shock wave through his nervous system that wiped out the fear, the confusion, the absurdity of the situation. There was only her. "You are real," she whispered, staring at his mouth. "You are here." Elias looked at her. He saw the scales shimmering on her temples, the alien geometry of her cheekbones, and he didn't care. He felt a desperate, almost frightening desire to close the inch of space between them. He wanted to anchor himself to her. He wanted to prove that this wasn't another dream that would vanish when the alarm went off. He leaned in. Her eyes fluttered closed. He could feel the heat of her breath on his lips. Boom! The world shattered. The ground jumped 6 inches into the air. Elias was thrown backward, crashing onto the concrete. Eliana stumbled, catching herself with cat-like grace, her hands instantly glowing with defensive energy. Above them, the sky was on fire. The shimmering dome of the photonic shield was rippling violently, turning from invisible to a chaotic, strobing violet. Something was hammering it from the outside. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of heavy rotors filled the air, so loud it vibrated in Elias's teeth. He scrambled to his feet, looking up. Through the distorting waves of the failing shield, he saw the dark silhouettes of 3 attack helicopters circling the observatory like vultures. Suspended between them were smaller, sleek shapes, drones. But these weren't human drones. They were jagged, insect-like machines that moved with impossible speed, firing beams of concentrated concussive force into the shield. "They found us," Elias yelled over the roar. Eliana was already moving. She tapped frantically on her wrist device. The signature masking failed. They were tracking the resonance spike when we linked minds. Another explosion rocked the dome. A spiderweb fracture appeared in the energy field directly above them. Through the crack, the sound of the outside world poured in. Sirens, rotors, and a voice amplified by a loudspeaker. "Target identified," the voice boomed, mechanical and distorted. "Surrender the asset. Compliance is mandatory." "Is that the cops?" Elias shouted. Eliana swore, a harsh, guttural sound that sounded like rocks grinding together. Vrukta. The meaning exploded in Elias's mind through the link, traitors. "It is a joint task force," Eliana shouted, grabbing Elias's arm and hauling him toward the center of the terrace. The Obsidian Vanguard, human black ops funded by the Teradyne Corporation, working in concert with the Vilos war faction. "Humans and aliens working together," Elias yelled as another blast shook the concrete. "I thought we hadn't made contact." "The rich always find each other first," Eliana snapped. "They want the war. Teradyne wants the alien weapon contracts. My cousin wants the throne. They need you to unlock the engine so they can reverse engineer it. And they need me dead to clear the line of succession." The shield above them groaned. A massive chunk of the energy field collapsed, dissolving into sparks. One of the hunter drones shrieked, a horrible digital scream, and dove through the breach. It leveled a weapon at them. A glowing red eye focused on Elias. Eliana didn't hesitate. She threw out her hand, and a bolt of blue plasma erupted from her palm. It struck the drone mid-air, shattering it into burning shrapnel that rained down around them. "We cannot fight them here," she yelled. "The shield will fail in 30 seconds. Where do we go?" Elias panicked, looking around. The observatory was surrounded. The only way down was the road, and that was blocked by armed vehicles. Eliana grabbed her wrist device and twisted the bezel. "We do not go. We jump." She held up her arm. A beam of white light shot from the device, striking the empty air in front of them. The air screamed. It wasn't a metaphor. The fabric of reality let out a high-pitched tearing sound as the light forced it open. Space warped. The view of the Los Angeles skyline twisted, stretched like taffy, and then tore open to reveal a swirling vortex of indigo turbulence. It was a portal, a jagged, unstable wound in the world. "A gate?" Elias yelled, staring into the swirling void. "You have a stargate in your watch?" It is a short-range spatial fold, Eliana shouted. Highly unstable in an atmosphere. It will collapse in seconds. The shield overhead shattered completely. The sound of the helicopters became deafening. Spotlights pinned them to the concrete. Surrender! The loudspeaker boomed. Bullets began to chew up the concrete around their feet, warning shots getting closer. Eliana grabbed Elias's hand. Her grip was desperate. Elias! She screamed over the noise. We have to go! Now! Elias looked at the swirling vortex. It looked like death. It looked like falling off the edge of the world. He looked back at the city. He saw the lights of the streets where he had walked for 28 years. He thought of his apartment with the flickering fridge. He thought of his mother, who he hadn't called. He thought of the safety of a life that was boring, miserable, and predictable. If he stepped through that hole, he was gone. He would be a missing person on a milk carton. He would be a conspiracy theory on his own podcast. There was no coming back from this. I can't, he yelled, terror gripping his throat. That is, I can't just leave Earth. Eliana looked at him. The spotlights reflected in her galaxy eyes. She didn't pull him. She didn't force him. She just held his hand and looked at him with that same devastating intensity she had in the alley. Trust me, her voice whispered in his mind. Not a command this time. A plea. Please. Do not let me go alone. A bullet chipped the concrete inches from his shoe. A missile from a helicopter struck the observatory dome behind them, blowing the structure apart in a fireball of masonry and steel. The heat washed over them. Elias looked at her face. He saw the fear, but he also saw the promise. He saw the connection that had spanned light years. He realized, with sudden crystal clarity, that staying here meant dying as a nobody. Going with her meant living, even if it was only for 5 more minutes. He squeezed her hand. Okay, he said. Okay. He didn't look back at the city. He looked at her. Jump, Eliana commanded. They leaped together. They hit the surface of the portal and the world dissolved. There was no sensation of falling. There was a sensation of being unmade. Elias felt his body stretch into infinite spaghetti strings of atoms. He saw colors that human eyes weren't meant to process. He heard the sound of the universe breathing. And then, impact. He slammed into a hard, cold metal floor. The air was knocked out of his lungs. He slid across the smooth surface, tumbling head over heels until he crashed into a bulkhead. Alarms were blaring. Not the wailing sirens of Earth, but a rhythmic, pulsing klaxon that sounded like a giant heartbeat. Thrum. 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 Elias gasped, rolling onto his back. The air smelled sterile, recycled oxygen and ozone. The gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth. He scrambled to his knees. He was on a deck, a wide, metallic platform surrounded by banks of holographic displays. Crew members, tall, slender figures in sleek uniforms, some human-looking, some with too many limbs or eyes, were scrambling at stations, shouting in that flowing, vowel-heavy language. Eliana was already on her feet. She stood in the center of the deck, barking commands. Status report. Shields up. Divert power to the FTL drive. Hull breach detected in Sector 4. A crew member with blue skin shouted back. Enemy vessels are locking weapons. Elias looked up. The entire wall in front of him was a window, a massive curved viewport that spanned the width of the room. And outside was Earth. It was immense. A glowing blue and white marble hanging in the blackness of space. He could see the curvature of the horizon. He could see the storm clouds gathering over the Pacific. He could see the tiny, glittering lights of the cities on the dark side. He was in space. He was in orbit. We are tracking 3 frigates on an intercept course, the blue-skinned officer yelled. They are charging ion cannons. Eliana turned to the helm. Her eyes were blazing. Cloak, she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. And initiate the jump. Get us out of here. Where to, Highness? The pilot asked. Anywhere but here, Ileana shouted. Punch it. The ship shuddered violently. The view of Earth outside the window rippled. The stars elongated into streaks of white fire. Elias watched, frozen, as the planet of his birth shrank away into the distance. In a heartbeat, it was gone, swallowed by the tunnel of hyperspace. He slumped against the bulkhead, staring at the swirling lights of the faster-than-light travel. His heart was beating so hard it hurt. He was alive. He was terrified. And for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Elias woke to the sound of silence. It was not the silence of his apartment, which was always underlined by the hum of the refrigerator or the distant wail of a police siren. This was a heavy, pressurized silence, the kind that felt thick enough to touch. He sat up. The bed beneath him was not a mattress, but a slab of memory gel that contoured perfectly to his spine, warm and slightly vibrating. The room was dim, lit by veins of soft amber light pulsing slowly within the walls. There were no sharp corners here. Everything was curved, organic, as if the room had been grown rather than built. He rubbed his face, his hands feeling numb. His memories arrived in a chaotic, fragmented slideshow. The alley, the glowing eyes, the observatory exploding, the jump. He scrambled out of bed, his bare feet touching a floor that felt like warm stone. One wall of the cabin was dominated by a large oval transparency. Elias walked toward it, his breath hitching in his throat. It was a screen, not a window, but the resolution was so perfect it looked like a hole in reality. On the display, a sphere of blue and white hung suspended in the velvet dark. It was receding, shrinking with every heartbeat. Clouds swirled over the oceans in familiar patterns. He could see the night side, the spiderweb of golden city lights where millions of people were sleeping, eating, arguing, and living lives that suddenly seemed microscopically small. Earth. It looked fragile. It looked like a marble that could be crushed between a child's fingers. It is beautiful, is it not? Elias spun around. Ileana stood in the doorway. She had shed the heavy battle armor. She wore a tunic of shifting liquid fabric that draped loosely over her tall frame, the color oscillating between deep violet and charcoal gray. Her feet were bare, without the high collar of her armor or the brim of a hat. She looked younger, less like a galactic warlord and more like someone who carried a weight she hadn't asked for. It is small, Elias said, his voice raspy. He turned back to the screen. I never realized how small it was. You see the pictures, the NASA feeds. But watching it go away, that is different. Ileana stepped into the room. The door slid shut behind her with a whisper of air. We are currently moving at sublight speeds to conserve energy while the nav computer calculates a safe route through the debris belt. That view is live. She came to stand beside him, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel the radiant heat of her body. I kidnapped you, she said softly. It wasn't an apology, just a statement of fact. You saved my life, Elias corrected, though the bitterness was there, sitting heavy on his tongue. Those Black Ops guys were going to turn me into pink mist, but yeah. You also took me away from the only planet where I can breathe the air without a filter. The environmental systems on the Star Weaver are calibrated to your nitrogen-oxygen requirements, she said. You will be comfortable. Comfortable? Elias scoffed, turning to face her. My life is gone. Ileana, my job, my mom. I didn't even clear my browser history. Do you know how terrifying that is? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I do not know this browser history, but I sense it is a source of great shame for your species. The humor fell flat. The air between them was charged, static electricity building in the confined space. The walls hummed with the vibration of the engines, a low thrum that resonated in Elias's chest. He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that same disorienting pull he had felt in the alley. She was an alien, a literal extraterrestrial princess, and yet, standing here in this quiet room, she felt more familiar to him than people he had known for 10 years. "Why?" Elias asked. "You gave me the short version at the observatory. Now I want the long version. Why is a human audio engineer the key to a galactic peace treaty?" Eliana sighed. She motioned to the gel bed, and they sat on the edge, keeping a careful distance between them. "My mother was Empress Solara," Eliana began, her voice taking on a melodic storytelling cadence. She believed that the 7 systems could exist in harmony. She drafted the Accord, a treaty enforced not by armies, but by the engine, a machine built by the progenitors, the race that seeded life in this sector millions of years ago. The engine creates a damping field. It neutralizes high-yield antimatter reactions. As long as the engine runs, no fleet can fire a planet-killer weapon. War is limited to skirmishes. Civilization survives. Sounds like a good system, Elias said. "It was," Eliana said darkly. "But peace is bad for business. There is a faction within my own court, the Vilos supremacists, who believe our species should rule the galaxy, not share it. And they found a partner. Teradyne," Elias guessed. "The human corporation." Eliana nodded. Teradyne has been secretly mining alien technology from crash sites for 50 years. They made contact with the war faction. The deal is simple. The war faction sabotages the engine, disabling the peace field. They invade Earth in a controlled, theatrical first contact war. Teradyne miraculously develops weapons to fight them off, using tech the aliens provide. Teradyne becomes the savior of humanity and the ruler of Earth. The war faction gets to wipe out their other rivals while the galaxy is distracted by the conflict on your planet. Elias stared at her. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. It sounded exactly like the kind of thing Cosmic Ray would scream about on the podcast, right before selling survival buckets. "And me?" Elias asked. "Where do I fit in?" "The progenitors locked the engine," Eliana said. "It requires a biological key to reboot or shut down permanently. A genetic and neural sequence. We thought the line was extinct, but the progenitors seeded many worlds. Your DNA, Elias, it is a ghost, a mathematical impossibility. You are the only living being in 3 sectors who can walk into the engine room and tell it what to do." Elias stood up, pacing the small room. He felt trapped, not just on the ship, but in a destiny he hadn't chosen. "So I am a tool," he said, his voice rising. "I am a thumb drive. You didn't look for me because you cared. You looked for me because you lost your keys." Eliana flinched. The bioluminescent scales at her temples flared a brighter blue, betraying her emotion. "It is not that simple," she said. "It feels that simple," Elias snapped. "You talk about free will, about saving Earth, but you just dragged me into a war I don't understand to use me as a glorified password. Did you ever stop to think maybe I don't want to be the savior of the galaxy? Maybe I just wanted to pay my rent. And live in misery?" Eliana shot back, standing up to meet him. Her height was imposing. She loomed over him, her eyes flashing. "I felt your mind, Elias. I felt your gray, suffocating loneliness. You were drowning on that planet. Do not pretend you were happy." "I was safe," Elias yelled. "Safety is not nothing." "Safety is a cage when you are meant for the stars," she shouted. They stood chest to chest, breathing hard. The anger in the room was hot and sharp, but beneath it was something else, a friction that felt dangerously like attraction. Eliana exhaled, forcing her shoulders to drop. I did not mean to yell. You are right. I am using you. My people are using you. But I swear to you, Elias, if there was another way, I would take it. I do not want you to be a tool. I want you to be my ally. Elias looked at her. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, the weight of an entire empire resting on her collarbones. He let out a long breath, the fight draining out of him. Ally, he muttered. Okay. I guess that is better than pet. We have 2 days before we reach the neutral zone, Eliana said, her voice businesslike again. If we are going to survive the council, you need to be ready. You cannot walk in there looking like a podcast editor. Hey, Elias said weakly, it is a skilled profession. The training began an hour later in the ship's cargo hold, a cavernous space with magnetic plating on the floor. First, Eliana said, tossing him a suit that looked like a sleek wetsuit made of matte black material. Zero gravity maneuvering. If the artificial gravity fails during a firefight, which it will, you need to not vomit inside your helmet. I have a sensitive stomach, Elias warned, pulling the suit on. It tightened automatically against his skin, warm and supportive. Gravity offline, Eliana commanded the ship's computer. The sensation was instant. Elias's stomach lurched into his throat. His feet left the floor. He flailed, his arms windmilling, and immediately began to spin in a slow, humiliating circle. Do not swim, Eliana called out. She was floating effortlessly, her body a straight line, rotating with precise small movements of her hips and shoulders. Air is too thin to push against. You must use momentum and anchor points. Easy for you to say, Elias grunted, drifting upside down. You grew up in space. I grew up in gravity. Grab the handhold, she instructed, pointing to a yellow bar on the wall. Elias lunged for it. He missed, his hand slapping the metal, and the force sent him spinning in the opposite direction, straight toward Eliana. Whoa! He collided with her. It wasn't a graceful impact. His knee hit her hip, and his arm tangled with hers. They spun together, a tangle of limbs floating in the center of the room. Elias found himself pinned against her, his face inches from hers. He grabbed her waist to steady himself. She grabbed his shoulders. They stopped spinning. They just floated there, suspended in the air. You have terrible balance, Eliana whispered. She sounded breathless. I am working on it, Elias murmured. He could smell her scent again, ozone and rain. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilating in the low light of the cargo hold. His hand was splayed across the small of her back. The material of her suit was thin. He could feel the muscles shifting underneath, the heat of her skin. For a moment, nobody moved. The ship's drive hummed around them. Elias felt a sudden, fierce urge to pull her closer, to bury his face in the crook of her neck. It was irrational. It was biological. It was the most intense thing he had ever felt. Eliana cleared her throat, her cheeks darkening with a violet flush. She gently pushed him away, sending him drifting back toward the floor. Gravity online, she choked out. Elias hit the deck with a thud. He groaned, rolling over. Okay. Maybe we stick to psychic training. Yes, Eliana said, her back to him. She was adjusting her gloves, her movements jerky. Psychic defense, that will be safer. Later, during the ship's night cycle, Eliana found him in the observation lounge. The lights were dimmed to a deep blue. She was holding a small glass tablet. You cannot sleep, she stated. Hard to sleep when your brain keeps replaying the moment you left your solar system. Elias said. He was sitting in a contour chair, staring at the streaking stars of hyperspace. Come, she said. I want to show you something. She activated the room's main projector, the center of the lounge filled with a holographic cloud of light. It was a map of the galaxy, a swirling spiral of billions of stars. This is the Milky Way, she said, or as we call it, the Great Spiral. She touched the controls, and thousands of tiny red dots appeared, scattered across the spiral arms like dust. What are those? Elias asked. Search vectors, Ileana said quietly. Probe launches, psychic sweeps, diplomatic missions. She looked at him. Every dot represents a week of my life, a week I spent looking for the resonance signature. Elias stood up and walked into the hologram. He was surrounded by the red dots. There were thousands of them. You went everywhere, he said, stunned. My advisors told me I was chasing a ghost, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They said the progenitor line was dead. They told me to marry a cousin, to secure the throne, to let the engine die. They said I was a foolish girl obsessed with a fairy tale. She stepped closer to him, the starlight from the map reflecting on her skin. But I felt you, she whispered, in the static. I knew you were out there. I knew I wasn't crazy. Elias looked at the map, then at her. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. While she had been scouring the galaxy, fighting political battles, defying her own family just to find him. He had been editing podcasts and complaining about bad coffee. He had spent his life mocking the very idea of destiny, while she had been burning her life down to find hers. I am sorry, Elias said. For what? For being disappointing, he said honestly. You looked for a hero. You found a guy who is afraid of heights. Ileana shook her head. She reached out, her hand hovering over his arm. I did not look for a hero. Elias. Heroes are brittle. They break. I looked for a partner. Their hands brushed. The contact was electric. The mind link flared open, wider than before. Whoosh! Elias wasn't in the room anymore. He was in her head. He felt the crushing weight of the crown, the isolation of a childhood spent in marble halls where no one touched her. The sheer exhaustion of keeping up the mask of the perfect princess. He felt her fear, not for herself but for the galaxy, and beneath it all, a raw, aching loneliness that mirrored his own. She was a star in a void, burning bright and unseen. And she felt him. She felt his life of being the weird kid, the observer, the one who never fit in. She felt his deep-seated belief that he was a mistake, a background character in someone else's story. You are not a mistake. Her thought echoed in his mind, warm and fierce. You are the missing piece. The link softened, returning them to their bodies, but the intimacy remained. Elias looked down at her. She was trembling. He reached out and traced the line of bioluminescent markings on her shoulder. Her skin twitched under his touch. The light pulsed, changing from blue to a soft, warm gold. Your markings, he whispered. They change color. They react to emotional proximity, Ileana murmured. Her eyes were half closed. She leaned into his touch, her breath hitching. Elias moved his hand up to her neck, his thumb brushing her pulse point. It was beating fast, a fluttering bird against her skin. The desire in the room was a physical weight now. It wasn't just biology, it was two souls recognizing each other after a lifetime of blindness. Ileana, he said. She looked up at him, her lips parted. She looked vulnerable. She looked ready to fall. Elias leaned in. She tilted her head back. The galaxy map swirled around them. Forgotten. Clang. The ship lurched violently, throwing them apart. The lights in the room flashed red. The holographic map dissolved into static. "Proximity alert," the ship's computer screamed. "Interdiction field detected, dropping from FTL." Elias slammed into the wall. "Again? Seriously?" Eliana was instantly transformed. The vulnerable girl vanished. The princess returned. She tapped her wrist comm. "Bridge, report!" "We have been pulled out of the stream." Kalen's voice crackled over the speaker. 3 heavy cruisers. Vilos War faction markings. They have us in a gravity well. "I am on my way," Eliana said. She looked at Elias. The softness was gone from her eyes, replaced by cold steel. "Stay here." "Not a chance," Elias said, pushing himself off the wall. "I am the key, remember? If they want me, I should be where I can see them." Eliana hesitated, then nodded. "Move." The bridge of the Star Weaver was a chaotic symphony of alarms and shouting. The main viewport showed 3 massive, jagged warships surrounding them like sharks circling a wounded seal. Kalen, Eliana's second-in-command, was a towering alien with slate-gray skin and 4 eyes. He turned as they entered. "Highness!" Kalen barked. "They are hailing us. They demand the human and your surrender. If we do not comply in 2 minutes, they will open fire." "Shield status?" Eliana asked, sliding into the command chair. 30%, Kalen said. He lowered his voice, stepping closer to her. "Highness, we cannot win this fight. Their shields are military grade. We are a diplomatic yacht." "I am aware of our tonnage." "Kalen," Eliana snapped. "Give them the human," Kalen said. Elias froze. He was standing near the comms station. He heard it clearly. "What?" Elias said. Kalen ignored him, focusing his 4 eyes on Eliana. "He is the target. If we jettison him in a pod, they will collect him. They will let us go. You are the heir. Your life is paramount to the survival of the house. He is an instrument, a primitive." Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked at Eliana. This was the logic of empires. This was the math. One life for the future of a dynasty. Eliana looked at the screen, then at Kalen. Her face was unreadable. "Is that your counsel, Commander?" she asked quietly. "It is the only logical path," Kalen insisted. Eliana stood up. She walked over to Elias. She placed a hand on his chest over his heart. She looked at Kalen. "The logic of my house is what caused this war," she said, her voice ringing across the bridge. "We do not trade lives. We do not sell our allies to butchers. If we die with our honor." She turned to the helm. "Pilot, plot a course for the Obsidian Nebula." The bridge went silent. Even Kalen looked horrified. "The Obsidian Nebula?" the pilot stammered. "Highness, that is a ship graveyard. Ion storms, collapsing wormholes. It is suicide." "It is cover," Eliana corrected. "They cannot target us in the ion clouds. Do it, now." "Yes, Highness." The ship surged forward. On the screen, the stars blurred as the Star Weaver dove toward a massive, bruising cloud of black and purple gas that loomed on the edge of the system. "Hold on!" Elias yelled as the inertial dampeners struggled to keep up. The ship slammed into the nebula. It was like driving into a hurricane. Lightning arced across the viewport. The hull groaned, metal shrieking under the pressure of gravitational tides. "Evasive maneuvers!" Eliana shouted. "Keep us in the turbulence." Behind them, the enemy ships hesitated. They fired blindly, beams of green energy slicing through the gas clouds, missing the Star Weaver by meters. "They are not following," Kalen shouted, monitoring the sensors. "The radiation is blinding their targeting computers." Elias gripped the back of Eliana's chair, his knuckles white. "We are going to make it." Thud. A dull, heavy sound reverberated through the hull. It wasn't an explosion. It sounded like a giant metal fist hitting the ship. "Report," Eliana yelled. "Hull breach in Section 9. The computer replied. "Projectile impact. No explosive payload detected." Kalen checked his console. "It is a harpoon, a distinct solid-state projectile. It has latched onto the outer hull." He tapped the screen. "It is transmitting a pulse, a low-frequency tracker." Elias looked at the screen. "They tagged us? Like a shark?" "We must detach it," Kalen said, reaching for the controls. "I will send a drone to cut it loose." "Belay that order," Eliana said sharply. Kalen paused. "Highness, it is broadcasting our position. Even in the nebula. They will find us eventually." Eliana stared at the tactical display. Her eyes narrowed. She was calculating. "Leave it," she said. "What?" Elias asked. "Why would we leave a tracking device on the ship?" Eliana looked at him. For a split second, her eyes flickered away, avoiding his gaze. "Because if we remove it, they will know we found it," she said. "I can jam the signal for now, but having their frequency out, it might be useful. We can use it to feed them false data later." "It is a risk," Kalen growled. "It is a strategy," Eliana said firmly. "Mask the signal. Continue course through the nebula. We head for the neutral station." She turned back to the main screen, watching the swirling gas clouds. Elias watched her back. He felt a prickle of unease. The mind link was closed now, but he had learned enough about her to know when she was holding something back. "Useful," she had said. He remembered what she had told him about the harpoon being a strategy. But he also remembered Kalen's words. He is an instrument. Was she keeping the tracker to feed them false data? Or was she keeping it because she had another plan, one that involved using herself, or him, as bait in a trap he didn't know about yet? The ship shuddered, clearing the edge of the nebula. The stars returned, cold and distant. "Course set for the council station," the pilot announced. "ETA, 48 hours. Eliana slumped slightly in her chair. She didn't look at Elias. "Get some rest," she said to the crew, her voice tired. "We have a long flight." Elias stood there for a moment, watching the profile of the alien princess who had saved his life and whom he had almost kissed in the starlight. He wanted to trust her completely. He wanted to believe that the connection they shared was stronger than politics. But as he looked at the blinking red light on the damage display, the harpoon buried in their side, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still just a piece on a board he couldn't see. He turned and walked off the bridge, the silence returning, heavier than before. The station of Auras hung in the void like a jeweled bracelet discarded by a giant. It was an immense torus, a ring city of spun silver and transparent aluminum, rotating slowly around the bloated, dying red sun of the sector. The star was so vast and so old that it filled half the sky with a bruised, crimson light, casting long, bloody shadows across the station's hull. The Star Weaver docked at a private spire reserved for high-caste nobility. The clamps engaged with a bone-rattling thud that vibrated through the deck plates. Elias stood in the airlock, tugging at the collar of his tunic. It was a formal garment Eliana had fabricated for him, made of a stiff, midnight blue material that shimmered like oil on water. It had a high, rigid neck and long sleeves that covered his hands to the knuckles. He felt like a child playing dress-up in a museum. "Stop fidgeting," Eliana said. She was standing behind him, smoothing the fabric across his shoulders. She looked breathtaking. She wore a ceremonial gown of white and gold, the fabric so light it seemed to float around her like smoke. A heavy mantle of platinum chains rested on her shoulders, denoting her rank, and her white hair was braided with threads of light. Her bioluminescence was dimmed to a polite, regal glow, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the readout on the door. "It itches," Elias complained, trying to mask the churning terror in his stomach with banality. "And I look like a magician from a 1990s music video." "You look like a diplomat of the Terran ascendancy," Eliana corrected, her hands lingering for a second on his shoulders. "Stand tall. Walk like you own the ground beneath your feet. The council smells fear like ozone." The airlock hissed open. The smell hit Elias first. It was a chaotic assault of spices, ozone, burning incense, and biological musk. Then came the noise, a roar of 1,000 conversations in 100 languages, overlaid with the chime of transport bells and the hum of ventilation fans. They stepped out onto the promenade. Elias stopped dead. The interior of the ring was a continuous landscape that curved upward into the sky. He could look up and see buildings hanging upside down 10 miles overhead, connected by lift tubes that spanned the diameter of the ring like spiderwebs. The crowd was a dizzying swirl of biology. There were creatures made of rock and magma, beings of floating gas contained in glass suits, and humanoids with too many limbs or eyes. "Keep moving," Eliana murmured, taking his arm. Her touch was firm, grounding him. "Do not stare. Staring is a sign of predatory intent in 6 different cultures here." "Right," Elias whispered, forcing his feet to move. "No staring. Just casual walking through the Mos Eisley Cantina on steroids." They moved through the crowd. Elias felt exposed, a soft, fleshy human in a sea of carapace and chrome. He kept cracking jokes under his breath, a nervous tic he couldn't control. "That guy has a face on his chest," Elias muttered as a large, blue-skinned diplomat passed them. "Is that rude to look at? Do I look at the head or the chest? I feel like I am going to commit a hate crime just by making eye contact." Eliana let out a small, exasperated huff, bumping her shoulder against his. It was a tiny, intimate gesture that felt shocking amidst the formality. "His sensory organs are on the upper stalk," she whispered back, a hint of a smile tugging at her mouth. "The chest face is for eating. And please, Elias, try not to ask anyone about their digestive habits. We are trying to prevent a war, not start a diplomatic incident over table manners." "I am just saying," Elias grinned weakly. "It is a lot to process." They reached the turbo lift that led to the council chambers. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the crowd. The silence in the lift was heavy. Eliana's smile vanished, replaced by the mask of the crown princess. "We have 10 minutes before the session begins," she said, her voice tight. "We need to review the gambit." The private antechamber was opulent, draped in heavy velvet tapestries that absorbed sound. A large window looked out at the dying sun, bathing the room in a ruddy, apocalyptic glow. Elias paced the room, reciting the lines they had rehearsed. "I am Elias Thorn of Earth," he said, gesturing to the empty air. "I carry the resonant signature of the progenitor architects. I stand before this council to testify that the Accord engine has been sabotaged by a conspiracy between the Vilos war faction and the Terradyne Corporation." He stopped and looked at Eliana. "Was that forceful enough? Or did I sound like I was ordering a latte?" Eliana was standing by a mirror, adjusting her platinum mantle. She watched him in the reflection. "It was adequate," she said. "But do not focus on the words. Focus on the truth. When they scan you, they will taste your biosignature. That is the only proof that matters. You are the key. Your existence proves that the engine was meant to be locked, not weaponized." She turned and walked toward him. She reached out and adjusted the high collar of his tunic, her fingers brushing the skin of his throat. Her hands were cold. "You are shaking," Elias said softly. "I am terrified," she admitted, her eyes locked on his ceremonial collar. "If this fails, if Vorian twists the narrative, we will not leave this station alive. This is the end game." Elias looked down at her. The red light of the sun caught the curve of her cheekbone, turning her pale skin to rose gold. She looked incredibly young in that moment, and incredibly heavy with burden. He felt a surge of protectiveness that startled him. He wanted to take her hand. He wanted to pull her away from the window, away from the politics and the dying stars, and just hold her. "Hey," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "It is going to work. We have the data. We have the recordings from your ship. We are going to walk in there, drop the mic, and watch them scramble." Eliana looked up, meeting his eyes. The galaxy swirls in her irises were spinning slowly. The tension shifted, thickening into something else. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with the memory of the near kiss on the ship, the ghost of their mind link humming in the air. Her fingers lingered on his neck, resting on his pulse point. She could undoubtedly feel his heart hammering against her fingertips. "You are a brave man, Elias," she whispered, "for a podcast editor. And you are not so bad," Elias breathed, "for a royal alien stalker." He leaned in. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was gravity. He saw her eyes flutter, saw her lips part slightly. He wanted to kiss her more than he wanted to breathe. He wanted to bridge the gap between their species and their worlds and just exist in the simple, terrifying contact of her mouth on his. A chime rang out, harsh and discordant. They sprang apart as if they had been burned. "Session commencing," a mechanical voice announced from the ceiling. "Delegate entry in 2 minutes." Eliana took a deep breath, smoothing her expression into a mask of icy resolve. She looked at him, and for a second, the mask slipped. Her eyes were full of regret, a silent apology for the moment they had lost. "Ready?" she asked. Elias straightened his tunic. He felt the phantom warmth of her fingers on his neck. "Ready." He lied. The council chamber was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a vast, spherical amphitheater, with the podium floating in the center of a gravity-null field. The delegates sat in floating pods arranged in concentric rings around the center, hundreds of them, creating a wall of judgment. Eliana stood on the central podium, radiant and imposing. Elias stood one step behind her, trying not to look at the drop beneath his feet. "Members of the council," Eliana's voice rang out, amplified by the acoustics of the sphere. "I come before you not as an exile, but as a witness to treason." A murmur ran through the assembly. "The Vilos war faction," Eliana continued, pointing a finger at a dark spiked pod in the upper tier, "has conspired with a primitive corporation to fabricate a war. They seek to break the accord. They seek to enslave a sentient species, humanity, before it can take its rightful place among the stars." A holographic projection of a massive reptilian creature, Archduke Vorian, flickered into existence above the spiked pod. "Lies," Vorian boomed, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "The princess is a traitor who abandoned her post. She has been corrupted by exposure to the primitives." "I have proof," Eliana shouted, cutting him off. "I present the human, Elias Thorne, the living key to the Accord engine." She gestured to Elias. Elias stepped forward. He felt 1,000 eyes and sensors lock onto him. He tried to project the confidence Eliana had told him to have. "And I present the evidence," Eliana said. She slotted a data crystal into the podium's console. intercepted transmissions between Archduke Vorian and the CEO of Terradyne, plans to sabotage the engine, plans to bombard Earth. A massive hologram materialized in the center of the sphere. It showed a video feed, but it wasn't the feed Elias had seen on the ship. The image distorted, pixelating violently. Static screeched through the chamber, causing delegates to cover their audio receptors. The image cleared. It showed Eliana, but her eyes were glowing red, not violet. She was speaking to a shadowy figure. "The human is secure," the Eliana in the hologram said. Her voice was cold, distorted. "I have brainwashed him. We will use his biosignature to seize the engine. Once I control the weapon, the council will bow to me, or I will burn their worlds." Elias stared at the hologram, his blood turning to ice. That is not real. "He is my puppet," the hologram continued. "A simpleton. He will do whatever I command." The hologram vanished. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Then it exploded. "Treason!" Vorian roared from his pod. "She confesses. She plans to become a tyrant." "Arrest her!" another delegate shouted. "Seize the weapon!" a third screamed, pointing at Elias. "It is a fake!" Elias yelled, stepping to the edge of the podium. "It is a deep fake, a virus. She never said that." But his voice was drowned out by the roar of the chamber. Red lights began to flash. Security drones detached from the ceiling, their weapons charging with a high-pitched whine. Eliana was frantically typing on the console, trying to override the virus, but the system was locked out. She looked up at the drones, then at Vorian's pod. She realized, in a terrifying instant, that she had walked into a trap. Vorian had known they were coming. He had planted the virus in the neutral station's servers. She looked at Elias. He was shouting at the delegates, his face flushed with desperate anger, trying to defend her. "Listen to me," Elias was screaming. "She is trying to save you." Eliana looked at the drones. They were targeting him, not to kill, to stun, to capture. If Vorian got Elias, he would torture him, extract the biocode, and then dissect him. Elias would spend the rest of his short life in a lab, screaming. There was only one way to save him. She had to make him worthless to Vorian, or she had to make him a victim, so the neutral guard would take custody of him instead of the war faction. She had to break his heart to save his life. Eliana straightened her spine. She let the regality of her ancestors flood her posture. She tapped the microphone, overriding the room's noise with a feedback squeal. "Silence," she commanded. The room quieted, waiting for her defense. Eliana turned to Elias. She looked him in the eye. She walled off her mind, shutting down the link they shared so he couldn't feel her agony. "The hologram is false," Eliana said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But Vorian is right about one thing." She pointed a gloved hand at Elias. "He is nothing," she said coldly. "An unauthorized experiment, a primitive I plucked from the mud to test a hypothesis. He has no understanding of our politics. He is a tool I use to bypass the security protocols. He is of no consequence." Elias froze. The blood drained from his face. He looked at her, searching for the joke, the strategy. But her face was stone. Her eyes were hard, unyielding flint. "Eliana," he whispered. "Do not speak to me, human," she sneered, projecting her voice so the back rows could hear. "You have served your purpose. You are dismissed." She turned back to the council. "I demand a trial. I demand to be judged by my peers, not by this rabble." The betrayal hit Elias like a physical blow to the gut. A tool. That was what Kalen had called him. That was what she had promised he wasn't. "You," Elias stammered, stepping back. "You are lying." "I am royalty," she said, not looking at him. We do what is necessary. Behind her back, hidden by the sweep of her cape, her hand was making a frantic signal. 3 rapid pulses of light from a ring on her finger. Signal. Extraction gamma. Suddenly, the air in the chamber buckled. Boom! The skylight above the podium shattered. 3 black shapes dropped from the ceiling. Kalen and 2 of the royal guard, wearing stealth armor. They hit the podium rolling. Kalen tossed 2 silver spheres into the crowd. Flash bang. A blinding white light seared the retina of every being in the room. A deafening sonic pulse shattered the audio receptors of the drones. Go! Eliana screamed, dropping the act instantly. Get him out! Gravity inverted. Kalen threw a grav grenade. The floor became the ceiling. Delegates in their pods screamed as they were yanked upward. Debris, data pads, and dignitaries floated in a chaotic soup. Kalen grabbed Elias by the collar of his tunic. Move, human! No! Elias yelled, fighting the guard's grip. He was disoriented, blinded, and furious. She betrayed us. She bought you 5 seconds, Kalen roared, engaging his mag boots to stick to the floor while Elias floated. He hauled Elias down like a balloon. Do not waste them. Laser fire erupted from the upper tiers. Bolts of red energy sizzled through the air. Eliana was taking cover behind the podium, returning fire with a hidden energy pistol, drawing the attention of the security drones. Eliana! Elias screamed. Go! She shouted without looking back. Kalen dragged Elias toward a maintenance hatch in the floor. They tumbled into the darkness of the service tunnels, the sounds of the battle echoing above them. They ran through the bowels of the station. The corridors here were cramped, smelling of recycled air and grease. Elias stumbled, his vision still swimming from the flashbang. His heart was broken. It felt like a jagged piece of glass in his chest, a primitive, a tool. Nothing. The words looped in his head. We have a ship docked at the auxiliary port, Kalen grunted, shoving Elias forward. An escape skiff. We launch in 3 minutes. Where is she? Elias demanded, stopping and ripping his arm free from Kalen's grip. Where is Eliana? She is holding the line, Kalen said, his 4 eyes grim. She is buying us time. She is going to get killed, Elias shouted. We have to go back. We have our orders, Kalen snapped. Protect the key. I am not a damn key, Elias roared. He shoved the alien guard. It was like shoving a statue, but the anger gave him strength. I am a person, and I am not leaving her. Before Kalen could grab him again, a blast door ahead of them hissed open. Eliana sprinted through, smoke rising from a scorch mark on her white gown. She jammed a control panel, and the door slammed shut behind her, locking with a heavy thud. She spun around, chest heaving, eyes wild. She saw Elias and Kalen. Why are you not at the ship? She screamed. Elias marched toward her. He didn't care about the laser fire outside. He didn't care about the war. He was consumed by the raw, bleeding wound of her words in the chamber. You denounced me, he said, his voice shaking with rage. You stood there and told the galaxy I was nothing. Eliana froze. She motioned for Kalen to go ahead. The guard hesitated, then moved down the corridor to secure the airlock, leaving them alone in the narrow, flickering hallway. I had to, Eliana said, her voice ragged. They were going to execute you. By devaluing you, I made you a low-priority target. It was a tactic. A tactic, Elias spat. Is that all I am? A chess piece? Did you mean it? Any of it? Elias, we do not have time for this, she pleaded, reaching for him. He slapped her hand away. No, you do not get to do that. You do not get to pull me across the stars, make me care about you, make me love you, and then throw me away like garbage because it is tactical. The word hung in the air. Love. Eliana stared at him. The adrenaline was fading from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. The walls of the station shook as a heavy explosion rocked the sector. "You think I wanted to do that?" she whispered. Her voice broke. "You think it did not tear my soul apart to say those words?" She stepped closer, invading his space, her eyes burning with fierce, desperate tears. "I have the weight of 7 worlds on my shoulders. Elias, I have billions of lives depending on my pulse. I cannot afford to be selfish. I cannot afford to be happy." "So you chose the crown," Elias said bitterly. "I chose you," she screamed, shoving his chest. "I chose your life over my honor. I chose your safety over my reputation. I just burned my standing with the council to make sure you got out of here alive. How do you not see that?" Elias stared at her. He saw the scorch mark on her dress. He saw the terror in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a sudden, crushing realization of what she was doing. She was sacrificing herself. She wasn't coming with him. "You are not coming to the skiff," he realized, his voice hollow. Eliana didn't answer. Her silence was a scream. "No," Elias whispered. "No way, I am not leaving without you." "They will track the skiff if we are together," she said, tears spilling over. "I have to stay, I have to be the decoy. I have to let them capture me so you can get to Earth." "I don't care about Earth," Elias yelled, grabbing her shoulders. "I care about you, like Elias." "No!" The argument dissolved. The words weren't enough. The distance between them was too much and not enough. They collided. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a collision of desperation. Elias grabbed her face, his fingers tangling in her hair. Eliana gripped his tunic, pulling him down to her. Their mouths met, and the world vanished. It was messy, salty with tears, and terrifying. It was an apology and a goodbye and a declaration of war all at once. And the mind link flared. The barrier she had put up in the chamber shattered. Elias gasped against her mouth as her emotions flooded into him. He felt the sheer, towering magnitude of her love for him. It wasn't just a crush. It was foundational. He was her anchor. He was the only thing in the universe that made sense to her. He felt her terror at the thought of him dying. He felt her resolve to burn the galaxy down if it meant keeping him safe. And she felt him. She felt his realization that he didn't want to go back to his small life. He wanted the danger, the stars, the fear, as long as she was there. They broke apart, gasping, foreheads resting against each other. The air around them crackled with psionic energy. "I love you," Elias choked out. "Do not do this. I love you," Eliana sobbed. "That is why I have to." Alarms blared in the corridor. "Sector lockdown initiated," the computer announced. "Purge protocol active." "They are here," Eliana said, her eyes snapping open. She looked past him to the airlock door at the end of the hall. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward it. "Eliana, wait." She didn't wait. She used her royal override code on the keypad. The door hissed open. Inside was a small, cramped escape pod. Not a full ship, just a lifeboat. "Get in," she ordered. "No." Elias planted his feet. "I am not getting in that pod." Eliana looked at him. She placed her palm on his chest. "Forgive me," she whispered. She shoved him. Not with her muscles, but with a pulse of telekinetic force she had been holding back. Elias flew backward, tumbling into the padded seat of the pod. "Eliana!" he screamed, scrambling up. She slapped the panel on the outside. The blast shield slammed down, sealing him in. Elias threw himself against the glass viewport. "Open it! Eliana, open the door!" Through the thick transparasteel, he saw her. She was standing in the corridor. She smoothed her gown. She wiped the tears from her face. She adjusted her platinum mantle. At the end of the hallway, the blast doors blew open. Dark, armored figures, Vorian's elite shock troopers swarmed in. Eliana didn't look at them. She looked at Elias. She placed her hand on the glass, directly over his face. Her lips moved. He couldn't hear her, but he knew what she said. "Find the engine. Save us." She typed a command into the console. "Launch initiated," the pod's computer said blandly. "No!" Elias screamed, pounding on the glass until his fists bruised. "No, do not leave me!" Explosive bolts fired. The pod was kicked away from the station violently. Elias was thrown back into his seat as the G-forces hit him. He watched the corridor recede. He saw Eliana turn to face the soldiers, raising her chin in defiant royal challenge as they surrounded her. Then the pod fired its main thruster. The station became a blur. The red sun became a streak. Elias was rocketing away into the dark, screaming her name into the silence of the cockpit, while the woman who had crossed the galaxy to find him was dragged away in chains. The escape pod hit the atmosphere like a meteor, a streak of fire tearing through the dawn sky over the Nevada desert. Inside, the screaming metal and the roaring heat were deafening, a physical assault that rattled Elias's teeth in his skull. He was strapped into the acceleration chair, his body crushed by G-forces, watching the altimeter plummet. The retro rockets fired with a bone-jarring thud, slowing the descent just enough to prevent vaporization. The pod slammed into the hardpan, bouncing once, twice, carving a trench of fused glass and upturned earth through the scrub brush before grinding to a halt in a cloud of dust and steam. Silence rushed back in, ringing in Elias's ears like a siren. He fumbled with the harness release, his fingers stiff and bruised. The buckle clicked open. He kicked the emergency hatch release. The bolts blew outward, and the heavy door fell into the sand with a dull clang. Elias crawled out. He fell onto the dry, cracked earth, coughing as the acrid smoke from the thrusters filled his lungs. He rolled onto his back and stared up at the sky. It was a perfect, cloudless blue. A hawk circled high above, indifferent to the alien technology smoking in the crater below. He was alive. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the relief. It didn't come. Instead, a hollow, crushing grief expanded in his chest, filling the space where his fear used to be. "Eliana," he rasped, his voice a wreck. There was no answer, no mind link, no hum of shared consciousness, just the wind whistling through the sagebrush and the ticking sound of cooling metal. She was gone. She was millions of miles away, in chains, and he was alone in the dirt. 2 weeks later, Elias sat in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, staring at a laptop screen. The headline on the news site read, "Satellite collision causes worldwide communication glitches. Experts blame space debris." Beneath it was a video of a Teradyne spokesperson, a slick-haired man in a $2,000 suit, explaining that the spectacular lights seen over the city recently were merely atmospheric tests for a new global internet grid. "Lying vultures," Elias muttered, taking a sip of black coffee. It tasted like ash. He looked around the shop. It was the same shop he had come to every morning for 3 years. The barista was the same guy with the handlebar mustache. The woman in the corner was typing on the same screenplay she had been writing since 2022. Everything was exactly the same, and everything felt wrong. It was the uncanny valley of real life. The colors seemed too desaturated. The conversations he overheard, about rent, about dating apps, about the rain, sounded scripted and banal. He felt like an astronaut who had walked on the moon and then been forced to work a shift at a toll booth. He looked down at his bag. Inside, wrapped in a static shielding cloth, was a shard of the escape pod's navigation console. He had pried it loose before burying the pod in the desert. It was a jagged piece of crystal and dark metal, still humming with a faint, dying charge. It was the only proof he had that he wasn't crazy. His phone buzzed. It was Cosmic Ray. "Elias?" Ray's voice was distorted by cheap microphone gain. "You are not going to believe this. I have a source inside the Pentagon. He says the satellite crash was actually a reptilian mating ritual gone wrong. We need to record immediately. I have 3 hours of audio on the mating calls of the lizard people." Elias held the phone away from his ear. He looked at the rain streaking the window. "No," Elias said. "What?" Ray paused. "What do you mean, no? This is gold. Elias, this is the truth." "It is not the truth, Ray," Elias said quietly. "It is noise. It is just noise to keep people looking down when they should be looking up." "You sound weird, man," Ray said, his tone shifting from manic to suspicious. "Did they get to you? Did you take the fluoride?" Elias hung up. He didn't block the number. He just deleted the contact. He packed up his laptop and walked out into the drizzle. He didn't go back to his apartment. He couldn't stand the silence there. Instead, he walked toward the industrial district, to a small, cluttered electronics repair shop run by a woman named Jinx. Jinx was a conspiracy theorist, but not the lizard people kind. She was the corporate espionage, dark web, build-your-own-server kind. She had been the one person Elias had trusted with the shard. He pushed through the door, the bell jingling. Jinx was hunched over a workbench, soldering a motherboard. She looked up, pushing her magnifying goggles onto her forehead. "You look like hell," she said cheerfully. "Thanks," Elias said, dropping his bag on the counter. "Did you crack it?" Jinx's expression sobered. She put down the soldering iron and wiped her hands on a rag. "I did not crack it. Elias, you do not crack operating systems that are written in 12-dimensional math, but I found a back door." She turned a monitor around. It displayed a waveform, complex, chaotic, and beautiful. "This thing," she pointed to the shard Elias had brought in, "is trying to handshake with a network. It is dead, mostly, but the receiver is still listening, and last night it picked up a broadcast." Elias leaned in, his heart rate spiking. "A broadcast from where?" "Everywhere," Jinx said. "It is riding the carrier wave of the global news feeds, subliminal, encrypted, but the shard recognized the signature." She tapped a key. A video window opened. It was a recording of a galactic news broadcast, the kind Eliana had warned him about. The production value was slick, alien but translated into human-compatible visuals by Teradyne's servers. On the screen was Eliana. Elias stopped breathing. She was sitting on a throne of black chrome. She was dressed in heavy, suffocating robes of crimson and silver. Her white hair piled high in an elaborate, rigid style that looked painful. Her face was painted with ceremonial markings that made her look severe, cruel. But it was her eyes. They were dead. The galaxy swirls were dull, flat. "People of the Earth," Eliana said, her voice monotone. "I am Princess Eliana. I speak to you to warn you of the corruption of your own leaders. The accord is broken. Only the strong survive. My house offers you protection in exchange for loyalty." "She is reading a script," Elias whispered. "That is not her words." "Watch her hands," Jinx said softly. Elias looked closer. Eliana's hands were resting on the arms of the throne. They were clenched tight, but as she spoke, her index finger tapped against the metal. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't random fidgeting. It was a rhythm. "Is that Morse code?" Elias asked. "No," Jinx said. "It is binary. But not ASCII. It is a navigational syntax. I ran it through the decryption key you acquired from that Teradyne server leak last year. And it translates to coordinates, Jinx said. But not on Earth. Low orbit. Geostationary. She pulled up a map of the near-Earth orbital grid. A red dot pulsed over the Atlantic Ocean. The Teradyne Helios Station, Jinx said. Officially, it is a solar research lab. Unofficially, it is a fortress. And according to your alien girlfriend's tapping finger, it is where the heart is. Elias stared at the red dot. The heart. The Accord engine's interface. She is telling me where to go. Elias realized a wave of emotion hit him, pride, longing, and a fierce burning anger. Even in chains, even with a gun to her head, she was fighting. She was leading him. She expects you to do something about it, Jinx noted, looking at him sideways. Which is crazy, because you are a guy who orders mild salsa. Elias looked at the screen, at the dead look in Eliana's eyes. He remembered the way she had shoved him into the pod. He remembered the feeling of her mind touching his, the sheer magnitude of her sacrifice. He had spent his whole life watching things happen. He watched the news. He watched the podcasts. He watched his own life drift by like a leaf in a gutter. He had used irony as a shield, hiding behind the idea that nothing mattered so nothing could hurt him. But he was hurting now. And it was the most real thing he had ever felt. I am not that guy anymore, Elias said. He sounded surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Jinx, I need a shuttle. Jinx laughed. A shuttle? Sure. Let me just check my pockets. Oh, wait. I am fresh out of spacecraft. Teradyne runs automated cargo flights to the Helios station every 12 hours, Elias said, his mind racing. Supply drops, oxygen, food, tech components, they are unmanned. You want to mail yourself to space? Jinx asked, incredulous. You will freeze, or suffocate, or get crushed by a crate of frozen peas. I have the environmental suit from the escape pod, Elias said. It is rated for vacuum. If I can hack the manifest and get into a crate. If you get caught, they will vaporize you, Jinx warned. If I do nothing, Elias said, looking at Eliana's frozen image. They vaporize everyone, and she stays in that chair forever. He turned to Jinx. Can you hack the manifest? Jinx looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed and cracked her knuckles. I am going to need more coffee, and you are going to need a really big box. The cargo container smelled of ozone and synthetic lubricant. Elias was wedged between two massive coolant tanks, his knees pulled to his chest. He was wearing the black alien undersuit he had worn on the Star Weaver, with the bulky survival pack from the pod strapped to his chest. The darkness was absolute. He felt the lurch as the automated lifter picked up the container. Then the rumble of the maglev train taking him to the launch site. Then, hours of waiting. Finally, the roar. The launch was worse than the crash. The cargo rocket was not built for passenger comfort. It vibrated like a washing machine full of bricks. Elias gritted his teeth, counting backward from 1,000 to keep from passing out. 999, 998. He thought of Eliana. He pictured her on the flagship. He imagined what she was doing right now. Probably sitting in that suite, surrounded by guards, staring out at the stars. He reached out with his mind, trying to find that frayed edge of connection. It was faint, buried under layers of distance and interference, but it was there. A hum, a sense of presence. I am coming, he thought, projecting it into the void. Hold on. The roaring stopped. The vibration ceased. Weightlessness took over. Elias floated in the dark. He checked the oxygen readout on his wrist. 3 hours of air left. The flight plan said docking in 40 minutes. He closed his eyes and drifted. For the first time in weeks, he felt close to her. They were both in the void now, millions of miles away, on the bridge of the Vilos flagship Dominion. Eliana sat in her gilded cage. The suite was luxurious, draped in silk and velvet, but the door was sealed with a force field and a camera tracked her every movement. She stood by the viewport, watching the distant speck of the sun. She felt tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. The propaganda broadcasts were chipping away at her soul. Every lie she spoke felt like swallowing glass. She closed her eyes, seeking the meditation trance the monks of Kylos had taught her. And then she felt it. It wasn't a voice. It was a sensation, like a warm hand brushing against her cold skin. It was faint, distant but undeniable. Determination, focus, love, Elias. Her eyes snapped open. A spark of life returned to the galaxy swirls of her irises. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't mourning. He was moving. She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the transparency. He had decoded the message. He was going to the engine. A guard in the corner of the room stiffened. Step away from the viewport. Prisoner. Eliana turned. She didn't cower. She didn't look dead anymore. She smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. "I am just admiring the view," she said softly. "The stars look different when you know what to look for." The Helios station was a marvel of corporate brutality. It was a massive rotating wheel of steel and composites, bristling with sensor arrays and docking pylons. Unlike the elegant organic curves of the alien ships, the Helios was all sharp angles and warning stripes. Elias slipped out of the cargo container while the automated drones were unloading the pallet. He engaged the stealth field on his survival pack, a piece of tech he had salvaged from the pod. It wasn't perfect. It only distorted light for 10 minutes before the battery overheated. But it was enough to get him past the loading bay cameras. He moved through the maintenance vents, following the schematics Jinx had uploaded to his data pad. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "Central core, level -10, the basement of space." The station was eerie. It was fully automated for the night cycle. Cleaning bots hummed along the pristine white corridors. The air smelled of antiseptic and money. He reached the central shaft. It was a vertical tunnel running the length of the station's spine. He rappelled down the maintenance ladder, sliding fast, his gloves smoking from the friction. At the bottom, a heavy blast door blocked the way. It had no keypad, no handle, just a smooth surface of alien metal seamlessly welded into the human steel. "The interface," Elias breathed. He approached the door. He stripped off his glove and placed his bare hand on the metal. "Hello?" he whispered. "It is me. The key. Or whatever." The metal warmed under his touch. A ripple of blue light spread out from his palm, tracing complex geometric patterns across the surface. The door didn't open. It dissolved. The metal simply misted away, revealing a dark, cavernous chamber beyond. Elias stepped inside. The room was vast, circular, and humming with a sound that resonated in his bones. In the center, suspended over a pit of churning energy, was the machine. It was terrifying, a fusion of biology and technology, a beating heart of chrome and light. Cables as thick as tree trunks ran from the walls into the central mass, pulsing with rhythmic flashes of data. It looked like the station was feeding off it, or poisoning it. Elias walked out onto the catwalk. He felt small. He felt like an ant walking into a microprocessor. In the center of the machine was a console. It was clearly human-made, a jagged, ugly addition bolted onto the elegant alien tech. A keyboard, a screen, a joystick, It looked like Teradyne had tried to hotwire God. Elias reached the console. He plugged Jinx's datapad into the port. "Let's see what you are hiding," he muttered. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Teradyne files, classified memos. He read them, and his blood went cold. Project: Silent Night. Objective: Catastrophic failure simulation. Protocol: Initiate core overload. Target vector: Eastern Seaboard, North America. Narrative: Alien aggression event. They are not just going to fake a malfunction, Elias realized, his voice echoing in the chamber. They are going to nuke the East Coast. He scrolled down. Scapegoat asset: Elias Thorne. Biosignature to be implanted at ignition point. They were going to use his signature, the very thing that was supposed to bring peace, to trigger a mass casualty event. They would blame him. They would blame the aliens. And Teradyne would emerge from the ashes as the vengeful savior of humanity. "No," Elias said, "not today." He began to type. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't a hacker like Jinx, but he knew audio engineering, he knew frequencies, he knew harmonics. The engine wasn't just a computer, it was a musical instrument. It ran on resonance. "You want a signal?" Elias gritted out, overriding the Teradyne lockouts. "I will give you a signal." He bypassed the overload protocol. He diverted the power from the weapon systems into the communications array. He poured everything: the station's reactor output, the engine's idle energy, the reserve batteries, into a single focused beam. But he didn't aim it at Earth. He aimed it at the Vilo's flagship. He placed his hands on the alien interface panels, ignoring the human keyboard. He closed his eyes. "Connect," he commanded. The machine roared. The hum spiked into a scream. The blue light in the room turned blinding white. Elias didn't send data. He didn't send a file. He didn't send a virus. He sent himself. He poured every ounce of his emotion into the machine. The grief of the desert. The anger of the betrayal. The hollow ache of his empty apartment. And above all, the blinding, terrifying clarity of his love for her. He pushed it out, a psychic shockwave traveling at the speed of thought. Eliana. On the Dominion. The lights flickered. The guards in Eliana's suite looked around, confused. "Power fluctuation?" one asked. Eliana stood in the center of the room. She felt it coming. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a tsunami. It hit her. She gasped, her back arching. Her eyes slammed open and the galaxy swirls ignited with a brightness that cast shadows on the walls. She felt him. He was standing in the heart of the machine. He was terrified, he was angry, and he was absolutely unshakably hers. She heard his voice in her mind, not as words, but as a concept, a truth written in fire. "I choose you. Let's burn this script and write our own." The connection snapped into place. It was no longer a frayed thread. It was a steel cable. She could feel exactly where he was. She could feel the Helios station. She could feel the engine humming under his hands. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't a key. He was a partner. Eliana looked at the guards. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilled over. Silver tracks on her pale skin. But she wasn't crying from sadness. A slow, feral smile spread across her face. It was a smile that promised violence. It was a smile that promised revolution. "Highness?" the guard asked, reaching for his stun baton, unnerved by the sudden change in the atmosphere. "Is something wrong?" Eliana laughed. It was a low, dark sound. "No," she said, her voice vibrating with power. "Everything is finally right." She raised her hand. The heavy platinum manacles on her wrists began to glow. "My partner just invited me to a dance," she said, "and I hate to be late." She clenched her fist. The mind link surged. Across the void, Elias felt her answer, a roar of approval and a coordinate lock. "I am ready," she sent back. "Come and get me." Elias, standing in the blinding light of the engine room, opened his eyes. He smiled, mirroring her expression millions of miles away. "Okay," Elias said to the machine. "Let's make some noise." The surge of psychic energy from Elias hit Eliana like a physical injection of adrenaline. It was raw, unrefined, and overwhelmingly powerful. A chaotic mix of love and defiance that bypassed her logical defenses and flooded her nervous system. She looked down at the platinum manacles binding her wrists. They were designed to dampen her own psionic abilities, but they had not been calibrated for the resonance of a second mind piggybacking on her own. Eliana closed her eyes and pulled on the bond. She didn't push against the metal. She pushed through it, channeling Elias's reckless energy directly into the dampener circuits. The manacles whined, a high-pitched frequency that made the guard's teeth ache. The metal glowed cherry red, then blinding white. Snap! The circuits fused. The locking mechanism exploded, sending shards of hot platinum skittering across the floor. The two guards in the room reacted instantly, raising their stun rifles. But Eliana was already moving. She didn't fight like a princess. She fought like a storm. Fueled by the pounding rhythm of Elias's heartbeat echoing in her chest, she closed the distance in a blur of motion. She ducked under a rifle butt, swept the leg of the first guard, and drove her palm into his solar plexus with a precise discharge of kinetic force. He folded without a sound. The second guard fired. Eliana pivoted, the bolt of energy singing past her ear. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it with enough torque to dislocate the joint, and slammed him into the bulkhead. "Sleep," she commanded, pressing her fingers to his temple. A jolt of bioelectricity dropped him instantly. She stood alone in the suite, breathing hard. Her gown was torn, her ceremonial hairpins falling loose. She felt wild. She felt alive. She grabbed the guard's communicator and keyed an encrypted frequency she had memorized years ago. A frequency used by the old guard, the officers who had served her mother, not the war faction. "This is Princess Eliana," she said, her voice steel. "The coup is a lie. The war faction intends to glass Earth and break the accord. If you still honor your oaths to the Empress, meet me in Hangar Bay 4. We are leaving." 10 minutes later, Eliana stood on the deck of Hangar 4. Facing her were 12 officers and a squad of Royal Marines. They looked confused, frightened, and hesitant. "They say you are a traitor, Highness," an old captain said, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "They say you have been corrupted. They say what they must to justify murder," Eliana retorted. She didn't plead. She stepped forward, letting them see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had burned in her mother's. "Vorian does not just plan to conquer Earth. He plans to destroy the engine's safeguards. He will unleash a weapon that will not stop at human borders. It will burn Vylos just as easily as it burns Earth." She looked at them, letting her vulnerability show through the cracks in her armor. She let them feel a fraction of what she felt, the terror, the love for the human she had left behind, the desperate need to do what was right, not what was easy. "I am going to stop him," she said softly. "I am going alone if I must, but I would prefer to go with true soldiers." The captain stared at her, then slowly. He took his hand off his weapon and saluted. "The strike ship Valkyrie is fueled and ready, Highness." The Valkyrie tore out of the flagship's hangar, its engines burning violet as it punched a hole through the blockade. "Course set for the Helios station," the pilot shouted. "Micro jump in 3, 2, 1. The stars stretched into lines. Eliana sat in the co-pilot's seat, her knuckles white on the armrests. She reached out with her mind, finding Elias. "I am coming," she sent. "Do not let go." Elias was holding on, but his grip was slipping. The central chamber of the engine room was no longer just a room. It had transformed. The moment he had fully interfaced with the machine, the walls had dissolved into a swirling vortex of data and light. It felt less like a computer and more like a cathedral made of mathematics. He stood on the central platform, his hands buried in the interface gel. The machine was inside his head. It was trying to rewrite him. Protocol 99 Alpha. The voice of the machine boomed in his thoughts. It sounded like a choir of indifferent gods. Initiate cascading failure. Confirm target. Earth. No! Elias gritted out, sweat stinging his eyes. Override. Cancel protocol. User error. The machine countered, correcting. Visions assaulted him. Not hallucinations, but calculated probabilities. He saw a timeline where he refused. In this vision, he was back in his apartment. He was 40 years old. He was safe. He was eating takeout Chinese food and watching a game show. And he was completely, devastatingly hollow. He saw himself looking at the stars with a bitterness that tasted like bile. He had survived, but he had died inside. Then the vision shifted. He saw Earth burning. He saw the oceans boiling away under orbital bombardment. He saw the Vilos war faction raising flags over the ruins of New York and London. Submit. The machine pressed. Compliance ensures survival. "Compliance is death," Elias shouted, his voice cracking. He forced his mind to focus on the one thing the machine couldn't simulate: the chaotic, messy, illogical feeling of Eliana's hand in his. The smell of ozone and rain. The way she had looked at him in the alley. "I am not a user," Elias snarled at the light. "I am the key. And I say no." The Valkyrie dropped out of warp space directly in the path of the Helios station's defensive grid. "Shields up," Eliana ordered. Space lit up with green fire. Turrets on the station opened up, hammering the small strike ship. "We cannot dock," the captain yelled. "The clamps are locked down." "Then we make our own door," Eliana said. "Target the maintenance airlock on the lower ring. Blow it." "Highness, that is a decompression risk." "Do it!" A torpedo streaked from the Valkyrie, impacting the station's hull. Explosion. Atmosphere vented into space in a cloud of crystals. "Get us in close," Eliana commanded, standing up and activating her mag boots. "Marines on me. Zero-gravity combat protocols." The Valkyrie slammed its nose into the wreckage of the airlock. Eliana didn't wait for the seal. She blew the hatch and leaped into the vacuum, her personal shield flaring as she crossed the gap. She landed inside the station, the air rushing out around her. She engaged her mag boots, sticking to the floor as corporate security drones swarmed the corridor. "Clear the path," she shouted. It was a dance of violence. Eliana moved through the zero-G environment, pushing off walls and ceilings. She used her telekinesis to grab drifting debris, crates, panels, tools, and hurl them into the drones, shattering them. Her Marines followed, firing ion pulses that illuminated the dark corridor in strobing flashes of blue. She fought her way to the central lift. She didn't take the car, she cut the cables and jumped down the shaft, falling 10 stories in silence before firing her thrusters to brake at the bottom. She landed in the antechamber of the engine room. Standing between her and the blast door was a figure clad in heavy, ornate battle armor. It was Archduke Vorian. He held a massive energy glaive, the blade humming with dark power. He smiled, his reptilian features twisting. "Princess," Vorian rumbled, "you are persistent. Like a parasite. Move, Vorian. Eliana said, igniting a blade of pure plasma from her gauntlet. It is over. Is it? Vorian laughed. Do you think you are the first to try to use the engine for power? Your mother stood right here. Eliana. 30 years ago. Eliana froze. Do not speak of her. She considered it, Vorian sneered. She wanted to use the engine to force the Outer Rim worlds into submission, to ensure peace. She walked away because she was weak. I am finishing what she started. The Vilos bloodline is meant to rule, not to serve. The words struck Eliana like physical blows. Her mother, the icon of peace, had been tempted. The legacy she was fighting for. Was it all a lie? Was corruption woven into her DNA? She looked at the blast door behind Vorian. She could feel Elias on the other side. He was fading. The machine was eating him. She looked back at Vorian. My mother was not weak, Eliana said, her voice trembling with sudden clarity. She was tempted, and she said no. That is not weakness, Vorian. That is the only strength that matters. She raised her blade. And so do I. She didn't duel him. She didn't engage in his game of honor. She reached out with her mind, gripping the heavy blast door behind him. She wasn't trying to open it. She was pulling it out. With a scream of effort, she ripped the 10-ton metal door from its hinges and hurled it forward. Vorian's eyes widened. He raised his glaive, but the mass of metal hit him with the force of a freight train. He was crushed against the far wall, buried under the steel he had thought would protect him. Eliana didn't check to see if he was alive. She scrambled over the wreckage and ran into the chamber. The light in the room was blinding. Elias was kneeling on the platform, his back arched, his mouth open in a silent scream. Beams of energy were arcing from the walls into his body, lifting him off the ground. His skin was translucent, glowing with the machine's code. Elias! Eliana screamed. He didn't answer. He was drowning in the data. The system voice boomed. Critical mass reached. Overload imminent. Eliana ran to the platform. The energy field burned her skin, but she pushed through it. She grabbed Elias's shoulders. He felt like he was made of fire. Elias, look at me. His eyes were blank white. He was gone. Eliana realized that shouting wouldn't work. Words were too slow. The machine spoke in pure thought. She had to go in. She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against his. She lowered her mental shields completely. She didn't just open the door, she tore the walls down. Let me in. She dove into his mind. It was a chaotic storm of numbers and fear. She fought through the static, searching for him. She found him huddled in the corner of his own consciousness, a small, terrified version of himself surrounded by the screaming logic of the machine. She didn't tell him to fight. She didn't tell him to be a hero. She wrapped her consciousness around his. She showed him the truth. She showed him the moment in the alley when she first saw him. Not as a key, but as a wonder. She showed him the way he looked when he laughed at his own bad jokes. She showed him the fear she felt right now, not for the galaxy, but for him. You are not alone, her thought whispered, louder than the machine. We are the glitch in the system. Elias, you and me. Elias gasped in the real world. The white faded from his eyes, replaced by his own brown irises, rimmed with her violet light. He saw her. Eliana, he whispered. Together, she said, tears streaming down her face. Rewrite it. They turned to the console together. They didn't use their hands. They used their fused mind. 2 souls, 1 command. They grabbed the war protocol and shattered it. In its place, they built a new command. They accessed the databanks, the recordings of Vorian, the emails from Teradyne, the secret treaties, the lies, everything. Broadcast. They commanded, All channels, unfiltered. The machine hesitated. This was not a standard protocol. It defied the logic of control. But the biometric key was valid, and the royal authority was valid. Command accepted. The beam that shot up from the Helios station did not destroy the eastern seaboard. It did not destroy the Vilos fleet. It hit the global communication grid, and then it hit the subspace relays. Every screen on Earth turned black for a second. Every holopad on the Vilos flagship froze. Then, the truth started playing. People in Times Square looked up at the giant screens and saw the CEO of Teradyne laughing about acceptable casualties. Soldiers on the Vilos ship saw Archduke Vorian ordering the assassination of the Empress. The galaxy watched its leaders naked. The chaos was instantaneous. On Earth, riots broke out at Teradyne headquarters. Whistleblowers who had been terrified into silence suddenly flooded the internet with documents confirming the broadcast. The narrative of the alien invasion crumbled in minutes, replaced by a furious realization of betrayal. In orbit, the Vilos fleet mutinied. Captains who had been lied to turned their guns on the ships that still flew Vorian's colors. The war faction dissolved into infighting and surrender. In the engine room, the light faded. The hum died down to a gentle purr. Elias and Eliana collapsed onto the metal grating, tangled together, gasping for air. They were burned, bruised, and exhausted. Elias looked at her. Her hair was a mess. Her face was smudged with soot. "We did it," he wheezed. "We broke the internet." Eliana laughed. It was a weak, shaky sound, but it was real. She pressed her face into his neck. "We broke everything," she murmured. "Now we have to fix it." 6 months later, the new station, Concordia, orbited Earth. It was not a ring of silver nor a wheel of steel. It was a patchwork, human modules bolted to Vilos spires, a messy, functional, beautiful collaboration. On a private observation balcony, Elias stood watching the aurora borealis shimmer over the northern hemisphere. He wore a simple jacket, but on the lapel was a pin, the insignia of the new Interstellar Council. The door slid open. Eliana stepped out. She wore no crown. She wore simple robes of blue and gray. She had refused the throne, abdicating in favor of a democratic council composed of both species. She was no longer a princess. She was an ambassador. She came to stand beside him, leaning her elbows on the railing. "The council is still arguing about the tariff regulations on asteroid mining," she said, rubbing her temples. "I miss the days when people just shot at me." "No, you don't," Elias grinned. "No," she admitted. "I don't." She looked at him. The tension of the chase was gone. The desperation of the war was gone. What was left was something quieter, deeper. "My mother would have hated the furniture in the council room," Eliana mused. "But I think she would have liked the noise. It is the noise of people disagreeing without killing each other." "That is progress," Elias said. "Messy, loud progress." He turned to her. "You know, technically, we never finished our first date." Eliana raised an eyebrow. "Our first date involved a kidnapping, a high-speed chase through a nebula, and dismantling a galactic government. I would say it was quite complete." "I meant dinner," Elias said. "We never got dinner." Eliana smiled, and it reached her eyes, which swirled with soft, contented light. "There is a new noodle vendor on Deck 7. He claims to be from Osaka." "Probably from Jersey," Elias said. "But I am game." He reached out and took her hand. There was no static shock this time, just the warmth of her skin. The mind link was there, a low, comfortable hum in the back of his head, like a favorite song playing in another room. "Are you happy, Elias?" she asked suddenly. her voice serious. You gave up a lot. Your anonymity, your quiet life. Elias looked at Earth. Then he looked at the woman who had pulled him out of the gravity well of his own depression. I was a ghost down there, he said softly. Here, I am real. We are real. Yes, she whispered. We are. She leaned in. He met her halfway. The kiss was slow. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise kept. It tasted of peace, and noodles, and starlight. As they pulled apart, Eliana activated the holographic display embedded in the railing. It showed the galaxy map, the great spiral. The thousands of red dots, her search vectors, were gone. In their place was a single, pulsing beacon of gold, right where they stood. Earth. It wasn't a target anymore. It wasn't a backwater. It was a bridge. Found you, Elias whispered, looking at the map. Eliana squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the gold light of the new world they had built. And I, she said, I'm never letting go.